Welcome to lecture 2. This week we're going to look at a bit of the history of trade theories, building on the little bit of trade theories we did in lecture week 1. So we're going to start with pre-Smith. So firstly, there's a bit of things I need to discuss. Next week is your first essay due, based on a discussion on trade theories and maybe trade policy to a degree. Also, in terms of consultation, the consultation will stay on Mondays from 11 till 1 o'clock. It is purely log in Canva, go into the discussion group, type whatever you want to. It's anonymous, so no one can see your name besides me. So no one can see, hey, this person's maybe asking a question that was answered or something like that. Or sometimes by you writing a question, you think it might be an insignificant question or a question with little intelligence or something like that, or stupid question, some people would say. And it's actually a really good question for people to ask. I saw there was a few people waiting there for someone to type something, but unfortunately, yeah, it's not for me. It's not a discussion thing, anything. If you just want to discuss anything in there, from the lectures or from the notes, you're welcome to start a discussion that, and it's not limited to that time. You can always put something else anytime, any Canva, and ask me whatever. Obviously, there's WhatsApp available and everything. So that's all up to you. You have my numbers, you have all my contact details. You can drop even into my email something, um, which whichever suits you, and if whichever way you want to maintain your privacy. And then, but if I find it's something that's important that you're asking me, maybe privately, then I will bring it to the group's attention, to the class's attention. Okay, so let's really start. So what happened prior to Adam Smith? So what happened prior to Adam Smith is this concept of mechanicalism, mostly done by colonial powers. So idea of all these countries is we wanted to be super rich. We wanted to have all the wealth in the world. So how did they do this? So a lot of this was done by we're gonna export our product, but we don't want to import. So they could then sell the product if they wanted to when they limited exports. How did they limit exports? Either they had a ban on the product, you can't bring it in, it was so cheap and so cheap, or they implied some import tariff onto the product. So this prevented any other product from coming in. That also means now, because they're the only people within the country selling this product, and they could actually put the prices quite high. At the same time, they wanted to be competitive, so the prices wouldn't have been exceptionally high when trying to sell to other countries. But they could have, if the other country was not producing this good, they could. Then they could actually have set the price quite high. But the main idea is with exports, this is the way they wanted to create the wealth. Sell to the rest of the world, but do not buy from the rest of the world. But the problem with this is how did they gain the necessary resources for them to produce this product that they wanted to export? And this is where the colonial part came in. So certain countries they adopted or colonized, and they found the resources from these countries or sourced the resources from these countries and then sent it um, to their country. And then they produce the goods and then they sell from there. Who did they sell to? They actually sold back whatever they produced from this good back to the colonized countries. So strangely enough, this is how they made the money from taking something from another country, producing it into another product, and reselling it to the same country after having taken it from. In idealistic world, the best way that they could have, or the most manner which has been brought the most harmony between these countries, and we were trying to build a relationship. What you would have done rather is form a relationship with this country, allow them buy rights to find these minerals and resources, and actually allow this country to produce the good, and then maybe sell it to them for cheaper, and then they sell to the rest of the world or something like that. Either way, they took what was not theirs and made a profit on it by selling it back to this country. And strangely enough, because the resources was kind of free, selling back to this country indebted that country, because this country now paid for this product. Where did they generate the money from? It's probably that is the strange thing, because they're not really selling their own products, right? Everything from the country is getting sent to the European countries that have colonized them, and then they reselling it back to them. So these countries became indebted over time, and England, Great Britain, Spain, all those countries, they started building current account surpluses from the building of wealth through the exports, and limited, if not any, imports. And then, unfortunately, the countries that they colonized were building current account deficits. And in that way, by keeping them indebted, they can control them a bit better. As you see, it took a while for most countries who eventually reached the independence in the 1900s to kind of find some footing. In fact, most countries are still struggling in that. And we'll find later on what these colonized countries did to keep these guys struggling. So they couldn't just go and say, okay, we have the resources, we can now produce these resources. And it's all got to do with the infrastructure that was left by these by the European countries, and by these colonial colonies. Yeah, by these colonial powers. I mean, so there are some pros to mercantilism, and the pros is mainly for the country that's enforcing this type of trade policy of preventing imports and promoting the exports. Um, the first thing is you can get economic growth through it, and then you can definitely create some jobs, because it's mostly, and you can eliminate poverty because you're mainly stimulating your own production in your country. And then the latter part is you can become a more strong and influential nation, because now you have more wealth, and you have some controlling aspect of these countries where you have been sourcing your resources from, and you're made indebted by selling back to them. There are cons. It's a one-way traffic, so you're only thinking about yourselves. And we can see somewhere later in another example how thinking about yourselves could come back and haunt you. Other idea is here, other con is resources are not infinite. At some stage they're gonna run out. And then in order for you to keep your production in terms of exports like that, you're gonna have to source somewhere else. But then, and especially in terms of colonialized era, a lot of the colonies were really taken. A lot of these countries were really empowered, really belonging to another country in a sense. And a bit of the other parts I have discussed. We can move on to the next slide. I left something there at the bottom. Mentioned two countries who practice mercantilism today. I want you just to think about it, and if you want to, in the discussion or in the Monday 11 to 1 class or consultation, you can just drop me a line on who you think these countries are and why. It'd be interesting to get some asking or something, so it doesn't seem so dead during that time. Ask me on anything. Sometimes I might, in these recordings, you must be careful. I might use the wrong word or something like that, and I don't notice it. So it's for you to correct me, tell me, hey, in lecture 2A phase, what was did you mean this or that? And then I'll listen back to it, because I could make mistakes. So let's move on to the actual trade models that everybody knows. So I did discuss this a bit last week. So some of the stuff I might skip over. So the first main trade model by Adam Smith, absolute advantage, was came to existence in 1776, and it purely looked at the opportunity cost of labor from one sector to another. It was the main thing. Remember, Adam Smith and Ricardo, who came afterwards, the only thing that concerned them was labor. Labor was the only factor that they considered. Any other factors of production, capital, and that wasn't taken into the model. But it's maybe just they were simplifying just to be able to better show what they were trying to explain. So the main idea of Adam Smith said every worker needs to be able to work in the industry or at the company or in the sector of the market which best suits their skills. And then try to extend the idea from industries and says, okay, if each country is an industry, let's look at that in that terms. So our country, South Africa, it's the best at this type of particular skill, so maybe that particular industry, and we will specialize then in that industry alone, while other countries would then produce other commodities which they were better at, because they would be a different industry and they would be better at. Remember, this is all about what they produce cheapest, right? Cheapest, cheapest, cheapest. And the question is, what is cheapest? What is this absolute advantage? What do you mean by that? So there are two ways of looking at it, and both is correct. Whichever way you approach it, it's fine. So the first idea is to say, okay, I have this amount of resources. Country A and country B both have one laborer. How much does that laborer produce? Oh, this one laborer produces 30, 30 cotton. Well, the other laborer from the second country produces 25 cotton. So then definitely the first country's laborer has absolute advantage because they're using the same amount of resources, one laborer, but they're producing more. So this is the first part of the statement. Either utilize fewer resources per unit or to produce more when utilizing the same inputs. So sorry, I meant the second part of the statement. So if you have the same resources, the same inputs, and you're able to produce more with the same inputs and resources, and then you have absolute advantage. The second idea is to say, okay, I want to produce 10 units of a good. Country A wants to produce 10 units of a good. Country B wants to produce 10 units of a particular good. Who uses the least amount of inputs to produce that 10 goods? And if you do produce with the least amount of inputs, and then you also have absolute advantage. It's either producing a set amount of goods with the least amount of resources or using the same resources and producing more goods. That is what absolute advantage is. We can look at some of the problems of this model. So this is not everything you need to, all the readings do not, they only mention a few of the problems and then, and I mean, it's easy always to attack the assumptions of a model. Just say this is the problems. You are welcome to have a bit of a Google and find some other papers or whatever. It says a bit more about the limitations then, and you're going to need to do a bit of that, especially for writing your discussive essay on what is the best model out there, or why is this model not the best if I pose a question like that, especially for your exam purposes and that. So the first problem with Adam Smith's model is the idea of absolute advantage. What happens if if you're comparing two countries and there was only two products, cotton and wool, and country A was based at cotton and wool? What happens then? There's no ways they can, based on what Adam Smith is saying, enter into some relationship between these countries in terms of selling. So that's the first problem, right? And that is something I alluded to in lecture 1. And then obviously what came from that was comparative advantage. And we'll wait till we get there, huh? Hence, that's why comparative advantage is there. The second idea is only only concerning labor. That is the only factor of production. And the problem with that factor of production is we know there's capital being used. And in some arguments in today's time, we're using entrepreneurship and yeah, and there's land and all these funny things. So limiting the model to one factor production just made it easier in terms of showing calculations, but it's not the only factor production. And this is why you have the Heckscher-Oegelen model, known as HR model from here on. That model handles at least more factors of production, or at least takes into consideration capital. And then the third idea, which most models ignore, and I think the gravity model doesn't ignore this concept, distance between countries or freight costs and stuff like that. That's going to be seen as captured in in the gravity model. In this model, in the absolute advantage model, in the Smith model, there's no discussion about freight costs. It's no use to you cheaper producing your good, but once you factor in how much it's going to cost you to take it to another country, that your price is actually more than what that country can produce, what that other country that wants to import the good can produce at. So that's something you need to think about. And then the other idea is because they're looking at the Adam Smith model assumes that every labor is alike, the same. So in a sense that if you move from one industry to another industry producing a good, then when you sacrifice goods, it's like for like. It's constant opportunity cost. It means you're not incurring any cost from moving your production from producing shoes maybe to your production of producing boots. Is you're assuming it's a equal trade-off. Is whichever way you move between those two industries and that. So unfortunately, that model then assumes constant opportunity cost. So what is on constant opportunity cost in terms of a graph? If you remember your PPFs, you have your two products, product A here maybe. Okay, we can say product X. And then we have the product Y on the side. And with constant opportunity cost, what that means is you have a straight line PPF. What you are used to seeing, especially what you've done would have completed in micro, in honors, and maybe in third year, you would have seen a PPF or PPC, trade-off between two products, where it would have been curved, meaning there's a trade-off, decreasing opportunity cost. So this is the HO model. For our cases, for drawing purposes, that what you need to know is all the constant opportunity costs graphs. So anything related to Adam Smith or Ricardo, for those two models you need to be able to draw. And mainly for the Ricardian, I will be doing examples soon or in the lecture B for the second part. So you will then have to understand these graphs. These graphs are testable. I've tested them every year. It's the difference here is that I was able to do the lecture twice in a sense because it is difficult to pick up and to follow, but you actually have now the recording, so you'll be able to do it twice. That's when we get to that. And so this is important to understand. So this is what we're going to be dealing with, this model here, this one here on the left. This is what we're going to be taking into consideration for the rest of our work. This here on the right, all your third year theory and your honest theory to do with micro. I am not covering this at all. I'm not going to go through how you're supposed to find your equilibrium position. That is not what this course is about. I don't ask you technical graphs, but I can and will ask you the technical graphs when it comes to Ricardian and the Smith theories. So some of these things we have discussed, this constant opportunity cost, is to remember that moving a guy from medicine to a guy in construction is not exactly the same thing. They don't possess the same knowledge and the same skill sets. So it's not like for like replacements, which is model say. And for me, this is the biggest critique from constant opportunity cost that you can bring up in your discussion. If I see this in the shows, you were listening to the lecture slides and you were listening to me. And then the second idea from this constant opportunity cost is the idea of not the same ratio for goods. So you cannot produce one more in the construction by sacrificing that one production in medicine, because what it takes to produce in one construction good versus what it takes to produce one medicine good is different. Could find it uses more laborers to produce this one construction good with little capital. While for medicine, you'll find it uses a lot more capital with the less labor. So these are the things you need to consider, and the things I mentioned before had appeared in the first week's lectures or in lecture week 1, in a sense. And then this idea of intra-industry trade and inter-industry trade. Intra means within, inter means between. So if we're talking about intra-industry trade, then we're dealing with manufactured goods. So you can think about that as Samsung and Huawei phones, all in the same industry, but you can find that the sales between those goods. So let's rather change this. It's an iPhone, and we say Hawaii. So between those two, you could find that America is importing Hawaii phones, and then we can find that the manufacturers of Hawaii, I think that is South Korea, otherwise it's China. I'm sorry about this, and they all will be importing the iPhones. So we find that they are in the same industry importing same similar goods, but it's a little very small distinction between what those goods are. So that's industry trade. So they're both within the manufactured sector in a sense. In the inter-industry trade, that is to deal with your trading from the primary sector, maybe to the tertiary sector or something like that. So maybe, for instance, someone is trading cell phones. One country is trading cell phones, and one other country is trading apples. And they have exchange between these two countries. So this is the latter one, yeah, the one at the end today. So, but we find in the real world, what we're finding is that it's more the first type of trading that is occurring nowadays. So we find there's a lot of manufactured goods, and this is where the money is, right? The money and making your country grow is in the first part. There's very little money making in terms of you selling produce. So just be careful on that. So similar goods trading, and that is what is occurring more nowadays. So this is a part, you probably saw this my webpage that I had open. I was just trying to brush up on it. So we had Adam Smith, who came in 1976, and Ricardian came in somewhere in the 1800s. We'll find the date soon. And he pushes forward this idea. Smith pushes this idea forward, and it looked amazing. It's like, hey, let's specialize in what we are really good in. You, the other country, specialize in what you're really good in, and we intend to trade. But the first, early in the 1800s, Great Britain decided, wait, let's create this corn laws. We want to have full control on corn. So corn is not corn itself, right? It's wheat and all the other stuff as related to it. And if you Google it, you will be able to see what other products it is. And they did this by saying, we're going to be the only people who sell this, and we're going to export this. We're not going to buy from anybody outside. If you want to come and try to sell corn within our country, we're going to tell you, if you're not selling for a certain price, we're not interested. And to a later degree, what happened is that they started enforcing an import tariff on these products. And so this is how they controlled it. They controlled everything with their tariffs and that. So they tried to, obviously, what they were trying to do is create production within Britain. And by doing that, then you're looking out for your own country, you're creating growth in terms of jobs. So very much this was a mercantilism type of view. And they did this. And what happened? What do you think happened to them? In the end, all they did was, because they concentrated, higher prices. What does higher prices do to any market? If I see, hey, there's a whole lot of profit I can make in the corn industry, and say we're looking just in terms of Great Britain. Great Britain has pushed up the price. You can now sell very much high corn. That means there's a lot more profit to be made in the industry. The prices are escalating, getting pushed up, maybe beyond what is probably the best competitive or efficient price. And other industries is looking, this is where I want to move to. All the other companies is like, this is where I move to, and then maybe a lot of these companies and industries then shift to corn production, because that is where the more most profit can be made. Um, at the same time, then you're stifling the other industries because you're now shifting production away from other industries that's needed in the country, and you're now shifting to corn alone. So that is going to cause problems, especially in terms of your disposable income, which is a decrease, and also your growth of other sectors that are going to decrease in that. So this is the problem they face. But this wasn't the be all and end all, because I mean they were still making decent amount of money in the price of corn. What came along was one of his buddies, the Irish, they had a famine. And now your production has almost come to a halt. There's no more corn for you to sell. And you guess what? Corn or food products is something that you need to eat. You need to eat to consume it, right? So how can you eat to consume this if you're not in a producing country? And now all of a sudden you have to now, unfortunately, come back on what you try to do and block out the rest of the world from selling corn within your country. And you have to now open your borders to sell again. Um, so to agree, you had to, yeah, to a degree, Britain, it probably didn't look good on them, but they needed to do what they needed to do to survive. This also brings me to um, another issue with absolute advantage that I forgot about. So, in the real world, some people argue that you can't now just concentrate on one product. You need to feed yourself, your country, and then can you lead the production up to another country? Maybe not. So it's important then for you to say, okay, I need to produce some food within my country, and then maybe still concentrate on the one product that I'm really good in. So this is maybe what the model doesn't take in consideration, the idea that I need to produce something that is a necessity in my country, especially in the terms of when famine hits or when bad things happen in the world, when wars happen, and then production ceases across the world and nothing gets into you. So you need to be able to self-sustain your country in that form, just to ensure that your people are still living and eating and surviving. Okay, so that was just a side. We move back here. So that was the corners. The and then it came in a time when there was nice thought coming through in terms of trade models, when absolute advantage was already established for quite a bit of period of time, for at least 50 years. And the Ricardian is also he was also there. He started building on Adam Smith's idea. So this moves us now to Ricardo. Now this is where the example is coming. So I'm just going to go through the slide. I'm going to pause here and then create other video. So what you need to pick up from this is Ricardian came in the very early part of the 1800s, 1817, and he said there must be some form to trade because we can see it happening even though I might not have absolute advantage in the product, I can still intend to trade, and that's what we see across the world. Some people are still selling. Why? Because relatively to what I produce a product in a country, the price or the terms of trade within this product terms of trade within a country, I might still find it cheaper overseas than having to shift my production between two products. From moving from product A to product B, it would probably be cheaper for me still kind of to specialize in product A. Then instead of trying to produce a bit of B, it would be cheaper for me to then go and buy to trade my product A that I'm specializing with another country that's producing product B, rather than shift from production from product A to product B. So we obviously seen a bit of a calculation in week one about that, or discussion about that. I'm not going to discuss that idea of, well, I will to a degree discuss a bit more here in the example. So what is the model? Is a 2 by 2 by 2, a 2 by 2 by 1 model. So what does that mean? So 1 stands here for 1 factor of production, 2 countries, 2 products. HO model will be 2 by 2 by 2. The absolute advantage model is a 2 by 2 by 1. So that is important for you to pick up. We're still dealing with constant returns to scale. So that is that straight line going across, which also depicts obviously opportunity cost. So that is what we're still dealing with. And then we will obviously assume imperfect competition. So all The recording came or added to Adam Smith was this idea of relative advantage or comparative advantage, that we can still trade with another country on the idea that it's cheaper to trade with a country than actually ship our production. So this is the example we're going to do. I'm going to discuss the simplest stuff first from this example. So the things I'm going to discuss is absolute advantage, comparative advantage, inefficiencies, the idea of if Kenya produces 1 unit of a good, what does that mean? So that will be in a separate calculation.